Hey y'all, today I'm going to be answering a super common question that I get, sort of from everybody. I get this question when I present in front of any group, whether it's a conference or maybe I'm brought in to speak to some educators. I get this question from parents. I get this question in DMs on Instagram. And it's, what do we do to control these challenging behaviors? And today I'm going to focus on autistic kids, but this almost across the board will apply to any kid, um, neurotypical, neurodivergent. But some of the later on, as I break things down, I am going to talk a little bit more about some autistic traits specifically, but everything really does apply across the board. So, what do we do to help control these behaviors? I'm Sam Marion, clinical social worker, identifies mostly neurodivergent, background as a trauma therapist, and now primarily specialize in supporting neurodivergent individuals and their families from children up to adults, late identified autistic adults, wide range. Okay. Speaker, therapist, I do a lot. So I love the question, but it's always a challenging question because I have to turn right back around and say, the goal is never to control anybody. Our goal is to support people, right? We want to build scaffolding. We want to build supports. We want to put that in place. So we immediately have to reframe the question to not to control somebody, because anytime we try to control somebody, if that's the goal, we're probably always going to fail. We can't control. We can't support people. So I'm going to start off by telling you a few beliefs that I hold true to my core. And many groups have heard me say this through the years. Number one, all behavior is communication. So when you're talking about challenging behaviors, right? Eloping, running away, hitting, kicking, pushing, throwing things, challenging behaviors. Things that feel like safety concerns, which is why we want to control it. But controlling is not the way to frame it if we want success. Okay. Not if we want success in a healthy manner. Okay. So all behavior is communication. That behavior is communicating something. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is how to understand what it may be communicating. Two, there's no such thing as a bad kid. Never met a bad kid. I've met a lot of kids who've gotten in a lot of trouble for a lot of things. I've never met a bad kid. Hold that truth. Three is that we must presume competence. This language is increasing in a lot of disability spaces, a lot of disability conversations, that it is important to presume competence. Yesterday, I had a chat with a friend about another child with a very different kind of disability than autism. And that's the phrase they use is in that space, there's conversations ongoing about the importance of presuming competence. We've got to do that. But again, with everybody, how often do parents and doctors have a conversation in front of a small child about the child, assuming that, well, this kid doesn't understand? Kids are always paying attention, and they understand more than you think they do. When it comes to autistic kids or otherwise disabled people or kids, when we presume competence, then we're showing respect, and we're not getting things wrong as much. If we assume that, well, they can't speak or they don't speak, which are two different things, so therefore they don't understand, we're probably being hurtful and we're missing chances to connect with that person. Okay. All behavior is communication, no bad kids, presume competence. That's the foundation we're going to build from. Okay. I'm going to jump for a second. I'll come back around to this. I want to talk about the threat response system within our body, because I think a lot of these behaviors are coming out of that threat response system. So let's level set there for a moment. That threat response system gets activated in order to keep us alive. That's the design. It is faster than conscious thought. If you're ever baking cookies and like you burn your arm on the stove and on the oven, you yank your arm back before you really get burned, and you say that was hot, you don't get burned, maybe a little bit. But imagine if like that 350-degree oven is there, your arm is on it, and you have to register, oh, this is hot. This is hurting me. Okay, I should move my arm and process through that. I knew it would be faster than the way I said it, but it would still be much slower than the way it happens now. And we would all be injured much more often. Okay. So we got to recognize these reactions are happening faster than conscious thought. And the part of our brain that takes over in those moments is not the conscious thought part of our brain anyways. I'm not going to break down all like the scientific names and all that in this, but just understand that the part of our brain that can make rational choices is not the part that is in control at that time. So what activates that threat response system is a loss of agency, a loss of control. Any traumatic experience that I've ever had anybody discuss, and I've worked in a lot of settings with trauma therapists. I know there's things I haven't worked with, but it's hard to imagine what they may be. They always involve loss of control. All the groups that I've presented to on topic of trauma, I've always sort of challenged people to come up with an example of a traumatic experience that didn't involve loss of control of the individual or perceived loss of control or loss of agency. And that's a big part of it. Perceived threat. Okay. There may be a difference between a perceived threat and an actual threat. Looking on, we can see a difference. However, our brain does not register a difference. So if your brain perceives a threat, maybe you're startled because something shows up in your peripheral over here. It perceives a threat, even though there's not a threat there. It happens all the time, small scales. And so when we look at a person, we're going to talk about mostly kids today, kids in school, and we say, you're safe here. Honestly, in some ways, that's a meaningless statement. Because I can know somebody's safe. I can know somebody's safe in my office, but that doesn't mean that they are safe. This is where a lot of cognitive approaches don't help in trauma therapies or any time that a person's trauma response or threat response is activated, because that cognitive rational part of the brain is offline. Okay. Perceived threat is what matters. If a person perceives a threat, their body has a threat response. And that part of our brain doesn't really distinguish between a physical threat and an emotional threat. So while a bully may just say mean words or may make threats that they're never going to follow up on, I'm going to come to your house and tear up your teddy bear. We don't feel a difference there. Or somebody making fun of us is perceived as a threat. So the times that a kid, any kid in school, is having a big, they're throwing desks around the classroom because the kid in the back said something about their shoes. That's an emotional threat. And we may be saying, you were safe there. Well, what that response doesn't match what happened. Yeah, it does. For that person, it does. Okay. We need to understand that. And when we use terms like regulated, emotional regulation, sometimes being emotionally regulated means like connected and attuned to what we're feeling and it's aligned. And that doesn't always mean calm. If you have a threat response when you feel threatened, that may be regulated and aligned. So we need to get those terms kind of lined out too. Okay. So, and there's lots of things that they can lead, in the school settings, which we're kind of want to focus on too, right? A lot of things that can lead to a person perceiving a threat. But I want to focus for a few minutes on some autistic traits, specifically to talk about why autistic people might perceive threats more often. Because what happens in the neurodivergent brain and in the autistic brain is all these specific traits that make us autistic, myself included, these traits, when they're activated, cause a threat response. Okay, so I'm going to bring up some of the diagnostic criteria out of the DSM and how they may correspond or correlate to a threat response. Okay, so there are challenges in social emotional reciprocity, nonverbal communication, and relationships in general, understanding them, maintaining them. Which means if you're interacting with somebody, an autistic person may not quite understand the interaction, may not understand that joke was a joke, may not understand the implication of something, kind of the underlying meanings, the inside jokes, things like that. Sometimes autistic brain doesn't get it and totally misses it, and it's fine. Sometimes we are aware I'm missing something, or I feel like I'm missing something, and I feel confused. And when we're confused and don't understand something, it's a loss of agency, loss of control. I don't know what's happening right now. Threat response activated. Any one of these things. I don't understand the facial expression you just made. I always give the story. I tell people the story when I was in fifth grade. My fifth grade teacher was a politician's wife, and she would have this bright red lipstick on, blonde hair, bright red lipstick, would send me in the hallway because I talked too much, and would come out. Back in the days when you could send people in the hallway and just leave them out there as a normal thing. And my school at the time had open hallways and with no fence around the school. Now, like, as all security procedures get in, I could just walked away. But back then it was normal, right? And so she'd come out there to talk to me and have her finger in my face, pointing at me, lecturing me about talking too much, with a smile, bright red lipstick. Confusing for anybody, particularly the autistic brain, right? Repetitive behaviors, another trait. So when we deny somebody the opportunity to have their repetitive behaviors that help them to feel calm or regulated inside and out, that's a threat response. Loss of control, loss of agency, denying stimming, things like that help a person to regulate. I have clients come in my office and they do the same thing every time they come in my office. Earlier this week, I had a new plant in my office that's sort of crowding one of my chairs. And for the autistic person coming in who always sits in that chair, I asked, "Do you want to move that?" "Yeah, I think I do." "Okay, I'll move the plant. No big deal." And he sat down, settled in, we're good. That also means predictability. When routines get changed, I think this is the plan, and then suddenly it's not the plan. Sometimes parents see this, hey, we're headed to the grocery store, kid loads up the car, and then mom pulls in to the gas station on the way to the grocery store, and kid has somewhat of a meltdown, has a really hard time with that. Mom didn't think this was a change of plans. I just needed gas on the way to the grocery store. But that young person felt a difference there. Okay. So the repetitive part and routines, expectation, predictability, when that gets thrown off, then that's a threat response. That's a loss of control, loss of agency. Many neurodivergent people, autistic folks in particular, but also ADHD and others, have special interests or strong interests in things. And when we deny people that opportunity to have a lot of time with that may feel like a threat. A threat response may be activated. Some kids want to read every book in the school library on a certain topic. That's all they want to read about. And when the teacher says, no more of those, I'm tired of you reading just those books, you need to read this other one, that's a threat. It is perceived as a threat. Some people like, all right, fine, that's annoying. And some people just felt threatened because reading about that topic, that was comforting for that person. It was calming for that person. It helped them to feel more regulated inside and out. So we take away those interests. That's a threat. Then there's the sensory differences, sensory challenges. Some autistic people and neurodivergent people in general are hypersensitive, some are hyposensitive, and some are both, depending on the time, situation, and which sensory system we're talking about. There are at least 8 sensory systems. Therapists often talk about the 5-4-3-2-1 technique in order to ground. They engage 5 senses. But what about the vestibular system, which is all about balance? Proprioception, which is all about awareness of your body and space, and interoception, all those internal signals that are coming from inside your body. You got to go to the bathroom, you're hungry, thirsty. Every emotion you feel is felt inside your body. That is also a sensory experience. Every part of your sensory system, every one of the sensory systems can be regulating or dysregulating. And that can activate that threat response system in the brain. I presented at a conference not long ago, and I have a slide where I show all these different threat responses, which fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Okay, there's 4. It's flight or fight in the wild. Animals don't fight, like just want to fight. They fight to survive. So if they can run away and survive, they're going to do that first. And then they fight just to get away and survive because it's all about survival. And then it's the freeze or fawn. So these challenging behaviors oftentimes, almost always, are somewhere in the fight or flight response. If we're getting the freeze response, someone's just shut down, it is easier in the classroom. It is easier at times for someone to be shut down, but it's not a healthy response. Not great either. The fawn response, autistic masking, very, very similar. We go along to get along. It's the easiest way for me to survive this. So sometimes it means staying quiet because I don't quite understand what's happening around me. And so sometimes people get well into, maybe at school, they get well into an assignment and you have no clue they're actually really struggling because they don't understand the directions. They're watching other people. I've got a video on masking that talks about that a little bit more. Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. But the challenging behaviors are that fight and flight. Okay. So the question, what do we do to control these? Question should be, what do we do to support them? And we start by, we notice them through this lens. Where is their threat response system being activated? What and all these things. And usually there's a lot. Walk into any school in America and it's a sensory nightmare. Bright, a lot of activity. It's loud. It's, it's a lot. Smells. You have to walk. There's a lot of movement involved. And then you get to class, it's still. I move. I'm trying to stay in one place to record a video, but I move constantly. That's why my chair swivels. I need it. It helps me to stay more settled when I can do that. So then you put a kid in class and they have to sit still and they can't handle it as well. It is dysregulating for them to try to sit still and then they get in trouble as a result. Okay. And then one more thing I want to add here is this idea of cognitive load theory, which is there's two parts. I've got a video on this too. It gives a lot more detail. There's two main parts. So intrinsic load, kind of the brain power it's supposed to take to do the task. And then extraneous load, which is all the other brain power it takes to do the task for this person. So a dyslexic child in reading class is having to work hard, but the whole assignment is to work on building reading skills. That's intrinsic load. You put the same child in science class and they're trying to read a paragraph about owls, and other kids are not having a hard time reading it, and they're just trying to learn the facts about owls, while the dyslexic child is having to use a ton of brain power just to read, not even to memorize facts, just to read it. And that's what we talk about supports. Because over time, that extraneous load, the cognitive load, it builds and it adds up and becomes a weight and a burden. Okay. And that itself is also dysregulating. How many kids do you know go to school, they can make it through the school day and they get home, they're done? Cognitive load helps explain that. And then one more thing I want to add, anybody who has multiple disabilities, who's multiply marginalized, experiences even greater amounts of dysregulation and threat. There's an idea of stereotype threat, where if you are from a group that is not expected to do as well on something, you are oftentimes aware of that. And then as a result of these core beliefs, research shows, don't do as well. This is why there are big pushes now for women in STEM careers, things like that, because forever there was a stereotype that girls were not as good at math and science. And that's just false. There are studies that show that if they're told that everybody does just as well, these girls taking this test will do better, things like that. But I'm not going into that today, but all of this adds up. These are all threats that activate that threat response system that then impact these behaviors. There may be specifics to the multiple disabilities, things like that. Then you have to look at what are the threats experienced by this other person and their disability. If they have a visual impairment and they have a hard time seeing things, if you have tunnel vision, I don't know all the scientific terms of this, but if you basically have tunnel vision, you don't have much peripheral view and suddenly somebody's there, that may be very startling all the time. If you have hearing difficulties, right? We could break it down. If you have allergies, right? This isn't all just this is a lot of medical things that could impact some of this. Okay. So these behaviors, instead of thinking about it as controlling, look at it through this lens of how is their threat response system being activated, and what can I do? What can we do as a system to support that, to help them to not be so activated, to not cause dysregulation? And let's see if that doesn't change the behaviors. I feel very confident that it will make a big impact. Okay. And when we see the behavior pop up, we need to look back and ask ourselves, what happened? How did they feel threatened in this? I hope this has been helpful. I know I really kind of broke down a lot in this video, kind of a longer video, but I hope that it has been helpful for you. I hope that if it has, you'll let me know. Like the video, subscribe. I'm also on Instagram at Sam Marion Counseling, pretty active over there. So I hope you'll check me out. And again, I appreciate your time. I love to be responsive. Reach out to me if I can answer any questions for you. If there's something that you'd like to know more about that I touched on here today, maybe I can make another video, more content based off of that. So thank you for your time. Give me a like, follow, subscribe. Check me out on Instagram at Sam Marion Counseling.